Good afternoon and welcome to the Full Scottish. My name is Brian Liddy and it's Sunday the 12th of November, that's Remembrance Sunday today. I'm joined in the studio by one of our two guests. Hugh Marshall is with us today. Hugh, we're hoping that our second guest, Azra Berbić, will be able to join us. That's why we've held off. We're a little bit late because we were hoping that Azra would be able to be with us already, but hopefully she'll be able to join us later in the show. But anyway, how are you? Shomai.
Shomai, yes. I'm from a very wet and miserable South Wales. So I'm out of the house at the moment. I'm in the village of Llangaenor, which is the birthplace of Richard Price. It's his 300th anniversary this year, and he was one of the key architects of the Declaration of Independence in the United States.
Thank you for that. That sounds good. Interesting. So I'll start, as usual, with our routine, sadly routine, Ukrainian update, day 627. Former NATO Secretary-General Anders Fogh Rasmussen put forward a proposal for Ukraine to join the military alliance, but stripped of the territories occupied by Russia. Rasmussen, who led NATO between 2009 and 2014, insisted that a plan for partial Ukraine membership would not symbolise a freezing of the conflict, but would instead mark a determination to warn Russia that it cannot prevent Ukraine joining the Western Defensive Alliance. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz's governing coalition has agreed to double German military aid for Ukraine next year to €8 billion. Scholz's Social Democrats, the Free Democrats and the Green Party agreed on the increase in negotiations over the proposed 2024 federal budget this week. A senior Ukrainian military official played a key role in the sabotage of the Nord Stream gas pipelines in the Baltic Sea last year, according to a joint investigation by the Washington Post and Der Spiegel, published on Saturday. Roman Chervinsky, a colonel in Ukraine's Special Operations Forces, was the coordinator of the Nord Stream operation, according to reports in the US and German newspapers. Latvia's president said Russia is planning for a long war in Ukraine and urged wavering allies to continue supplying military support to Kyiv or risk Moscow threatening other countries. In an interview with Associated Press, Edgar Rinkevics said it was important to actually fight for international peace and peace in Europe, because if we stop Russia in Ukraine, then Russia is not going to be able to challenge other countries. On Saturday, Russia launched a missile attack on Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, and the surrounding region for the first time in more than 7 weeks, Ukrainian officials said. Serhiy Popko, head of the Kyiv City Military Administration, said a Russian ballistic missile was launched towards the capital at about 8 a.m. local time. He said the missile failed to reach Kyiv. Air defenders shot it down as it was approaching the capital. He added that there were no casualties or major damage. Ukrainian border guards said they had retaken a village in the country's northeast, adjacent to the Russian border. Online video from Kharkiv region showed border guards raising the blue and yellow Ukrainian flag in Topoly village alongside the Russian border. In the east, military spokesperson Oleksandr Stupu said Ukrainian troops had repelled 35 Russian assaults in and near Avdiivka, which has been under intense fire since mid-October. Officials in Avdiivka say they anticipate a new Russian push on the city once the ground dries up from days of heavy rain. Russian authorities said they had launched a terrorism probe after the derailment of a goods train southwest of Moscow. An improvised explosive device caused the derailment of 19 of the train's wagons in the Ryazan region on Saturday, the State Investigation Committee said in a social media announcement. Russian authorities have yet to blame Ukraine for Saturday's incident, but several sabotage attempts have been made on Russian railways since the country started its offensive against Ukraine in February 2022, and Moscow has repeatedly accused Kyiv of responsibility. Apologies to any of the individuals mentioned in today's update for my pronunciation of their names. Hugh, is there anything in today's update that caught your eye or that you'd like to pass comment on?
Yeah, I think it's the fact that, I heard yesterday that the first attempted missile attack on Kyiv had happened for almost 2 months yesterday. And the concern is obviously with what's going on in the Middle East at the moment is that eyes are moving away from the Russian-Ukraine conflict, and there's always a threat in that situation that Russia will try and take advantage of that, thinking that nobody is looking. Um, yeah, and try some sort of underhand tactics. But it's an interesting, I think what's happening in the Middle East is actually putting pressure on Putin, because obviously he's one of the ones, potentially backing Hamas as well, which isn't sort of earning him any sort of favors anywhere, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I think President Zelensky said that he feels that the world has sort of lost interest or stopped paying attention. Hugh, are you okay to carry on without
Yeah,
our other guest? Yeah? Okay, so
yeah.
yesterday was Armistice Day, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, the first day of peace after World War One. We'll be talking about that in detail a bit later. And today, of course, is Remembrance Sunday, when we remember the fallen. It seems fitting, I think, that after the events in Gaza, we should include civilians in that remembrance today. So there was an excellent show on Friday here at Broadcasting Scotland. Andrew Wilson was interviewing Philippa Whitford MP. So I would recommend that everybody should catch up on that. An excellent show. But the number of people that have been killed in Gaza by Israeli military action since the 7th of October has risen to 11,078, and that includes 4,506 children. It's been noted quite a few times by a few people that more civilians have been killed in Palestine than just in 1 month than has happened in the whole of the Ukraine, the whole Ukraine conflict. So, Hugh, are Israeli military actions proportionate, do you think, to what Hamas did a month ago?
I think first of all, obviously, you have to condemn 100% Hamas's actions. You know, they're a terrorist organization. That they're not the true representatives of the Palestinian people, and you have to feel for the people of Palestine having a terrorist organization like Hamas, sort of apparently in control of the area. It is an impossible situation. It's clear that Israel are out, to try and destroy Hamas. But it's there's a lot of anger there, and anger is a dangerous emotion when you're in this situation. And the loss of any life is sad. But to see so many civilians and how many of those are children losing their lives, they're not Hamas. But unfortunately, the ones who are surviving likely will be in the future if things continue as they are.
Hugh, I'm told that we are now joined by our other guest, but which reminds me, I didn't give you your introduction today. I'm really sorry. Hugh Marshall, you're the founder of the national newspaper in Wales and also the founder of Talking Wales. So welcome to the show. Azra Berbić, are you there? Can you hear us? Are you on audio?
Yeah, I am. I hope you can hear me as well.
Yes, we can. So, Azra, thank you for going to all the trouble to actually get through to us today. I know you've been having power problems, electricity cuts. So, Azra, you're a human rights and environmental and peace-building activist. And you're also a lawyer and a journalist based in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Thank you for coming to us today.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for having the patience for my technical difficulties.
No, not at all. We're really looking forward to hearing your contributions. So we're just talking about what's been going on in Gaza. I don't know if you've been able to listen, Azra. I was just asking Hugh if the Israeli military actions were proportionate. But I'll ask you, Israel, the state of Israel, and its attacks on Palestine, Gaza in particular. Do you think is this revenge for Hamas crimes, or is it a legitimate military action to remove Hamas from their position in Gaza?
Oh, this is a very, on me on a personal level, extremely emotional. And I believe for any reasonable human being, being, uh, being able to see, to have a live stream of what I believe is a genocide, and not being able to prevent it, to make more effects that other than protesting it, than calling for case fire, calling for politicians to be reasonable and to call out the Israeli government. It's really frustrating on a personal but also on a professional level, especially taking in consideration that I come from a people who, like, Bosnian genocide just happened 27 years ago. So it is really hard not to be emotional, but I also, there is no way that anyone in their, like, in reasonable mind of any human can justify what is now happening in Gaza. The way how people are targeted, children, hospitals we've seen. UNHCR said that Gaza has become, and I quote, "gravery of children." So it is, there is no way to justify it. I do understand the anger of people in general from both sides, especially Israeli people who lost their family members due to what Hamas actions. But Hamas does not represent Palestinian people, and for sure does not represent people who've been killed now, like massively killed. And since what I heard from the ground in Gaza, it's now it is really a hell on earth. So I don't believe that anyone can justify this, and I hope in our future we'll be able as a humankind to reflect on this, to punish the ones who are responsible for the way how people are treated, the way how people are cut off of everything that can provide them life, and on top of that how people are targeted now, because this cannot be justified by anything.
Thank you, Azra. So you mentioned that when you look at when you watch what's going on in Gaza, that it reminds you of what happened in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Do you think that people in your country, when they watch it, some people might be triggered in a sense, but when they see what's going on in Gaza, it will remind them of what happened to you?
uh, to be honest, again, I'll go back. Any human being, reasonable human being that sees what's happening in Gaza can be triggered, but people are definitely re-traumatized, I believe, all around. People, whoever has ever went through trauma of war is now being triggered and is traumatized. So as well, people in Bosnia and Herzegovina show a lot of solidarity with Palestinian people. Actually, at this moment, I believe now, currently, there is protest going on, second protest in solidarity with Gaza in Sarajevo. And people have collected a lot of humanitarian aid, have donated a lot of money, because
Thank,
people understand what's going on and how. But I believe that now, despite all the horrors that people in Bosnia and Herzegovina have gone through, that I don't believe, and I've been, like, witnessing conflicts all around the world, because the digitalization allows that. I've never seen this. Maybe the closest to this was what was happening in Syria, but this is this way of how humankind is allowing this to happen on this level, this is uncomparable to anything that I've seen. I do not say, and I do not claim that these other people around the globe and even in Bosnia and Herzegovina haven't survived something similar to this, but to this extent and to this. I've talked to a friend a few days ago who remembers the war. She was a child, and she told me, I used to ask my mother how come the world doesn't know what's happening to us, how no one is preventing this, what is happening to us. And I can only imagine how young Palestinian child can feel, and how helpless they feel and how left out. And it is the scariest feeling on the planet, to feel like that world doesn't care at all. And I believe like the suffering on every child, Israeli child and Palestinian child and Bosnian child and Ukrainian child, there is no child that should suffer and go through this. And I cannot understand how someone can justify these crimes, and especially justified by suffering of others. So then if we would continue to live like this, there would be no order, and then there should be no order, in my opinion, on this planet. And this is then not planet for humankind, definitely, if you are going to justify this.
Thank you, Azra. Time is against us, but thank you for that. I'll move on to our next item. So, war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide, international law should apply to all nations equally. When Russia attacked power and water supplies in Ukraine, it was condemned as a war crime, but Israel seems to believe it has the right to cut off power, water and food from Gaza, even in hospitals. Hugh, can the situation in Gaza be compared to the siege of Sarajevo or the Warsaw Ghetto? Actually, I'll ask that of Azra first. Is that okay, Hugh? Azra, did you hear the question there? Can the situation in Gaza be
Yeah,
compared to
I
the
do.
siege of Sarajevo?
Well, on some instance, regarding these so-called war tactics, it could be people of in Sarajevo were also cut out of electricity, of food supplying, of medical supplies, of heating, water, etc. And people were killed in the lines for food and for water, in lines for hospital, on a daily basis. But again, what I see now, like this is on a such a high level, the level of aggression that we are witnessing now, the level of how people are targeted is beyond imaginable. For me, I understand how some people, Israeli people, especially people who lost their loved ones due to Hamas actions, can feel revengeful and can say, okay, do that to those people, because the level of dehumanization is also we cannot imagine that. But to see, and I also believe that anyone who like people who are in support of Hamas, who participated in crimes against civilians, also should be punished. But this level of horror that people of Gaza have been put through cannot be justified by anything. And unfortunately, I hope no one takes this wrong, but what people of Sarajevo have been through was horrendous. But this cannot be compared on a level of horrors. It can be comparing what tactics are used, but this is on a such higher level that is extremely scary. I just now think what's going to be of future of humankind is just, for me, I cannot understand how we globally can justify it, because compared to Sarajevo, we had so many international reporters from all around the globe living in Sarajevo, in besieged Sarajevo, and reporting on the crime and what was happening. Now, even for journalists, it's almost impossible to report from Gaza. So really fear what's going to happen next when there are no journalists there, that when there is no one, there is no internet connection, that there is no one to inform us what's happening there.
Azra, thank you for that. Hugh, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Well, no, it's just, that's powerful testimony from some country that's experienced, such sadness within sort of living memory. But yeah, it is a war crime, and it's a really difficult situation. I understand after what Hamas did, the world leaders wanting to show their support, but there was, the way that everybody sort of rushed there. We had Sunak saying, wanted to win. This, wanted them to win, and because the thing is, it's not a war. They're not fighting. They're fighting against a terrorist organization. It's not an army. It's not a country. It's an ideology that they're fighting against. And sadly, they just seem to think they've got carte blanche to do whatever. And even when you get somebody like Starmer, when he was questioned on it by Nick Ferrari on LBC, and we all saw the clip. We all, I was actually listening to it at the time, when sort of he said that that Israel were within their rights. It's the fact that people are scared of saying the wrong things, for obvious reasons. The history of Israel and the Jewish people is complicated enough, and and it requires sort of very, very careful language and discussion. So yeah, but definitely, so they need to be held to account, and and it's important that that it will be done, but it's doubtful that it will be. Sort of Israel are almost seen as it's untouchable as a state.
Thank you, Hugh. Yeah, you mentioned Labour. Apparently, Labour have taken a hit in the polls recently, and people think it's because of Keir Starmer's. Voters say Labour has been more divided yeah, after the conflict and tension over the conflict in Gaza. I'm struggling to remember the name of an Irish MEP who gave a really powerful speech yesterday in the European Union, and she used the word genocide to describe the actions of the Jewish state. It seems incredible to me that the word genocide could be used to describe the Jewish state. I would have thought for a Jewish state to be accused of genocide would be unthinkable or unfathomable. Azra, did you manage to did you catch the speech? It was on Twitter quite a lot. I think maybe we've lost Azra.
Oh, no, you
Oh,
haven't lost
sorry.
me.
On you
No,
go.
I have not. Since in Bosnia and Herzegovina, like I've been really busy with a lot of environmental fights that we have lately, so I'm a lot on ground. But however, I try to follow and I try to keep my sanity as well, which is contrary to each other. Um, Regarding, yeah, I understand. For me, it's also I come from a country where during the Second World War, people of different origins and different religious background risked their lives to save Jewish people, and I'm extremely proud of that, of our past. And I really don't feel happy that I see the rise of anti-Semitism regarding people who have Jewish origin in the region, because we cannot blame all Jewish people, especially taking in consideration that we see a lot of Jews all around the globe who got condemned the crimes that now Israeli government is committing. So for me, it is important to differentiate that, like, Israeli people cannot be clarified as a genocidal people. It's ridiculous. But I do understand why people are calling on Israeli government at this moment, because the what we see are war crimes, what we see are genocidal intentions, definitely. I understand why people are this tough, and especially there are less and less vocal people in a position of power who are keeping like criticizing the actions of Israeli government. And I would just like to remind people that we need to be aware that in Israel, people have been protesting for tens of weekends against Netanyahu government. And all of the sudden, after this happened, this horrific attack on humanity as well by Hamas, when people were killed, happened, of the sudden, everything shifted. Uh, and people were in Israel were protesting actually against Netanyahu's decision to form a coalition with the far right groups. And now we see Netanyahu, who I, as a child and as a teenager, witnessed it, um, what what was happening in Israel and in Palestine during back when he was in power. So I understand why people, especially people who have a lot of experience and who've been following everything that was happening in last 15 years or 20 years in Palestine and in Gaza and in Israel, why there this stuff. And I see also news that people in US have been are being censored, and people are really scared to say anything against it. But people also need to understand that we have to discuss these issues, and I really appreciate this space, safe space, to discuss these issues, because if we are condemning the crimes that have been committed now against Palestinian people, systematically trying to erase every trace of Palestinian people in Gaza now, which is ordered and have been we are witnessing that it is justified by Israeli government. That does not mean that we support killing of innocent civilians in Israel at all, or anything in the world, any crime against any Jewish person around the globe. But somehow the world has created now this discourse that you are polarized and that you have to choose a side, which is ridiculous. So I'm happy that there are still people who are. Tineke as well. She's a Dutch member of EU Parliament. Was really also yesterday. She was really straightforward in EU Parliament, and she also called on Case on Fire. But also she was really vocal and saying, calling the names, calling the things the right name as well. So I am happy that there are more and more people who are talking about it, but I also hope that this polarization is not going to take us in completely two opposite way, but actually the only way we should go together is to call on stop of these horrendous crimes, try to make them stop doing this, and uh, to save people lives and to save dignity, um, because it seems like the universal declaration of human rights is not, like, it's not important at all. Anything that we agreed on a global level on, like uh, rules of how you act during the war, what are the targets, what are the human rights that we have to protect, children rights that we have to protect. Nothing's important at this moment. It seems like. So we have to think about it again, whether we are ready to go back to the dark ages when we will have to go again and say, "Oh, never again. We're not going to allow this." So I hope this moment is not going to come. I hope we will come globally, come to our senses and understand that we don't have to be polarized, and we as a humanity don't have to be on opposite sides. Um, yeah.
Thank you, Azra. So the Irish MEP, she made powerful criticism of the European Union stand on Gaza and failing to call for a ceasefire, and she used the word genocide to describe it, and said that it's not just the Israeli state that's guilty of genocide, but also the European Union, and wanted the EU to own the genocide that's happening in Palestine at the moment. But I better move on. So yesterday was Armistice Day. Today, as I said, is Remembrance Sunday. But Armistice was at the 11th hour, on the 11th day of the 11th month. The guns fell silent across the world. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn them. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. What is more disrespectful, a march for a ceasefire in Gaza or the right-wing thuggish counter-demos that are taking place? And for this question, I'd like to talk about Suella Braverman and also about the weaponisation of poppies. Hugh, I'll come to you first. Take your pick, Suella Braverman or the weaponisation of poppies?
Well, let's start with Suella Braverman. It's just deeply concerning that you've got a Home Secretary that is clearly out of control. But it's making you think. Is she actually unhinged? It was. She had obviously the comments. About the hate march. And the business with the living in a tent on a street as a lifestyle choice. And trying to sort of insinuate that the majority of those people who were in tents on streets were foreigners. As it's been stated on a number of occasions in the last week, she's playing out a sort of a grand sort of attempt at sort of a leadership campaign of the Conservative Party, and it's to use such sort of emotive subjects as a means to do that. It's deplorable, but it's clear, that her language, and sort of driven by, sort of the right wing elements of the media. They knew what they wanted. Because I was listening to Radio 4 earlier today, and they were talking to an expert in the field, and they were saying that they'd been monitoring the chat on football hooligan sort of channels, and up till a week ago there'd been no mention of this at all. But it was only after the sort of the Braverman comments, and then the media pushing it, then it all sort of started to explode. And it was clear yesterday, sort of I'm England till I die. It's an ultra right wing English nationalist sort of organisation who were there to cause trouble. And the thing that gets me as well is the language again the media used. They were being called counter protesters. They weren't counter protesters. They were agitators. They'd gone there for the sole purpose of causing trouble. And the marchers, were the marchers protesters, or was it a peace march? It was a march calling for an armistice, asking for a cessation of hostilities. And again, it's the way that the media frames these things, that causes problems. But I would be amazed if by the end, by next Sunday's full Scottish, that Braben will still be in post. I think they'll wait now until the Rwanda appeal comes back from the High Court, and once that's out of the way, she'll be gone.
Thank you, Hugh. I think it's important to note that yesterday being Armistice Day, commemoration of the first day of peace after the First World War, that people who were protesting on the streets, pro-Palestinian protests against the actions of the Jewish state, that they're being criticised for demanding peace on Armistice Day. Azra, The recent events that are happening in this country and maybe the actions of Suella Braverman, do they make the news in Bosnia Herzegovina? Are you able to follow what's happening here?
Yeah, as far as I know, no. But I did saw something around social media circling because since people are now there's this, especially around the region, this sense of solidarity that is forming for Palestinian people. Therefore, people follow up wherever there is a protest in Europe or around the globe that is in support of Gaza or in support of Palestinian people. So I saw something, but I wasn't able to catch it up in more details. But I saw that there were two contrary groups in a protest, and that people are worried what is actually, especially people from UK who live in the Balkans. I saw some people on social media commenting on that and saying how they are worried what is far right becoming now in the UK. So, but I'm not competent to comment on that since I don't have. I am able to understand what a far right movement is and how to see it and understand what are their actions. Since globally it's becoming, their tactics are the same in general, and arguments in general also are the same. But and on commenting on it into more detail and giving it more context, I'm afraid I'm not able to.
Okay, but thank you, Azra. I'll move on to the next item then, which is populism and fascism. There's been a rise in populist political leaders getting elected around the world. Are the numbers of authoritarian fascist governments likely to grow? I think we could maybe even talk about Suella Braverman in this item as well. But thinking about and what's happening in the USA, should America be concerned about Donald Trump suggesting he will use the FBI and Justice Department to go after political rivals? Azra, do you follow American politics much? Are you able to comment on the US at the moment?
Yeah, well, I believe this, I see this, as you also mentioned, as a global issue. It is becoming a global trend, and it's for some years now, and we see it even around the Europe in some of the EU countries. It's becoming more and more serious issue. And shrinking space for the civil society sector, for activists, for general shrinking space for human rights around the Europe. And next year we're going to have also elections in Europe and in many EU and non-EU countries. And I am really worried how it's going to end up, and especially when it comes to the US. Since it is a global force, so a lot of geopolitical environment and what's going to happen depends on the results of the elections. And Donald Trump is not someone who invented far right politics, but he really mastered it and how to polarize the society, and especially around populist topics. And there are even studies now that have been analyzing how these far right politicians are using these populist topics to polarize societies and to gain support. And I see that a lot of people, a lot of political leaders around the globe are inspired by Trump, and that's something that worries me. Um, American society is deeply polarized. And it's not solely caused by Trump's actions and during the time he was the president of the United States, but it's also a lot of topics that he and his government at the time made people polarized even more around, which of course serves their own purpose. So I am worried, to be honest, regarding, but I'm not. I can't also say and claim that okay, I don't know if Biden wins or whoever is going to be they're at next point in time on Democrats' side, that those people are not going to use also populist topics and in order to polarize people. And we see how people that for at the moment now U.S. government, how it's supporting everything that's happening in Gaza, the crimes that have been committed, despite the fact that they are from Democrats' side. So for me, regarding the threat of far right and them far right using the populist topics and in order to polarize people, I believe that it's becoming a global threat, and that the globally we are taking right turn, and I'm not sure what's going to be the end result of it, but we see it's up to us. And on top of that, we are facing humanitarian crisis globally, climate crisis. So it's only going to get even more difficult to fight these challenges. Therefore, I believe a lot of far right politicians are going to use this situation in their favor.
Thank you, Azra. Hugh, I'm kind of thinking post-war trends. I think we kind of thought that after Hitler and the Nazis had been defeated in World War II, that was the end of fascism, and now, as has been saying, we've got a rise in populist political leaders around the world. What's your perception?
Yeah, I think time, unfortunately, the further we get away from, sort of key bits of history, people tend to forget, and disassociate themselves from the past, because it's another era. But I agree, with what's just been said. You look at places like Brazil. Thankfully, Bolsonaro, sort of again, narrowly lost to Lula. But again, it does give you some hope. We've seen Italy. They've got a far right government now. Israel, under Netanyahu, his coalition with right wing parties. It's the share of the vote of the far right and extreme parties in Israel increased at the last election. I think it's interesting from a UK perspective, and it's interesting how Wales, England, and Scotland differ on these. We see from a UK perspective, sort of conservatives and reform stroke UKIP, the right wing elements, poll around 30% between them. So I think there is generally a 70% block that's against, sort of that right wing ideology. And I think, from a conservatives perspective, I think it's an interesting, one of the reasons why people like Braverman and Sunak to a certain extent are shifting further right is, they're terrified of, losing votes, not to the Labour Party, because they've lost, whoever's used to be, is gone to there already, sort of in their minds. It's losing those votes to reform and the to the right wing parties. So that's why they've put themselves in a difficult situation by pandering to the ERG, internally, in order to have that sort of aspect. But I think, when you look up in Scotland, reform, don't poll as highly up there as they do in Wales and England. And in Wales, disturbingly, we've got parties like the Abolish the Assembly. It's now a Senate, but they're still, they want to get rid of that element, that tier of democracy in Wales. So that there's an active campaign from the right to oppose devolution, and I think that's the sad thing, is when people get frustrated. I think in Scotland, people did see the SNP as a party that gave them an alternative to the mainstream parties. In Wales, Plaid Cymru who are, broadly, similar to the SNP, broadly sort of socialist party, have failed to sort of pick up support from Labour, and we've had Labour in power, in Wales for over 20 years, and they're still far ahead in the polls. But what was interesting this week, just to link in with, what Starmer, in England, not supporting the call for a ceasefire in the conflict in the Middle East. In Wales, a Plaid Cymru led motion was passed with support of some Labour Senedd members. So it's interesting to see in Wales where Labour members act far more independently than they do to their Scottish and English counterparts. And I think that's putting pressure on Starmer with the SNP and Plaid Cymru-backed motions going into Parliament next week, calling for a ceasefire. So it's this balance of politics, but it's anger and frustration that drives people. When you actually look at what people are worried about on issues, it's health, the economy, and education. Those are the key things. Things like small boats aren't, but they're very emotive, and it triggers something in people to think that their current sort of state and their misfortune is somebody else's fault, where in reality it's right-wing governments and far-right governments tend to do it not for any ideological reasons. They're there because they see it as an opportunity, as Trump did, to sort of line their own pockets and their friends.
Thank you, Hugh, and thanks for mentioning the SNP, because there's two things that I'd like to highlight. Just going back to the call for ceasefire, the only two world leaders that I'm aware of that have called for a ceasefire are French President Emmanuel Macron and our own First Minister Humza Yousaf, whereas, as you mentioned, Keir Starmer, but Rishi Sunak, the EU, Ursula von der Leyen, they won't call for a ceasefire. And of course, the SNP have just put in an amendment to the King's speech, which happened just the other day, where they ask for a measure that would require the government to uphold international law and protect all civilians in Israel and Palestine, unequivocally condemn the horrific killings by Hamas and the taking of hostages, and they want to see food, fuel, medicine and water reach civilian populations. Maybe take a minute to talk about that. Do you think the SNP amendment will get a chance to be debated properly?
Well, hopefully. And like I say, I think what happened in Wales, has set an interesting precedent. And I can only applaud those Labour members who voted with their conscience. It was interesting to see that one of the Conservative Senedd members, one from the Asian community, abstaining and not voting against. So again, there are emotions running there. It's tradition in Wales with these kind of motions that ministers and the First Minister, sort of don't, offer an opinion, and abstain on these things. But I think that putting pressure on Starmer, because he's obviously, going to try and whip his MPs to vote against it. But there's a precedent being set in Wales by those brave Labour members who actually put their heads above the parapet and said, enough is enough, and we need a ceasefire.
Thank you, Hugh. So our next item is the EU enlargement. So this week, the European Union approved enlargement for the Ukraine, Moldova, and Bosnia. The timing of this is striking, and questions whether the EU should have done more to support democracy and sanction those undermining it. Azra, I'll come to you first. What's your thinking on this EU enlargement, and do you agree that the EU should have done more to support democracy and sanction those undermining it?
I firstly can talk about Bosnia I believe that the EU lost a lot of time here in this region, not only in Bosnia and Herzegovina, due to their not necessarily bad politics, but due to not taking serious the warning of the people who are well educated and well knowledgeable from this region when warning them about our political leaders. And for me, although I am someone who supports Bosnia becoming part of the EU because I believe that should be our only part, natural part. I'm really skeptic on how the EU continues to avoid political leaders who have done nothing but get us to the point of us being a deeply corrupt society that has the one of the biggest brain drains in the world globally. So that serves enough as a proof of how how low we are in our progress in general. And now that we have made some progress around really things that our political leaders can agree on, and there are many more that they seem not to be able to agree on. That we are like politicians are being rewarded because they are going to say, oh, we were the ones who led Bosnia and Herzegovina. Because sort of the perception in EU and what they are creating, the general perception is that, oh, we have this new government, new people, when actually those are not new people. Those are just people who change parties, made their own parties, who've been in power on different levels while they were members of other parties. So I am really skeptical, and especially regarding Bosnia and Herzegovina, Bosnia has been put a lot of these conditions that were not, that other countries, other societies were not put on. And now, when I think about it, when I used to hear older grandmas and grandpas telling how this is the strategic politics of the EU to get young people, bright minds of this country, to get out of out of this country so they can use our natural resources. Now, it seems like that's becoming reality, and that's not just the EU; it's also UK. So I'm really doubtful when it comes to their good intentions always. Uh, I'm sure that on some level, for some people, political leaders in the EU, there are good intentions for sure. And I met a lot of those people who think only and wish only good for people in the region. But I also, if we don't see the progress in like fighting the corruption, which is deeply ruining this society, then I don't see the purpose of this. Let's hope that this is going to maybe make our politicians work even more. Who knows? Maybe because there are some young politicians who are now in governments. Maybe they are going to be the ones pushing these changes. Let's say, let's fight the corruption. Let's change something. Let's make a progress in this path. But as far as I'm concerned, we can also end up like Turkey. Regarding Ukraine, it was obvious. I expected that. Before the war, Ukraine was also really corrupted society, but they have made a progress significantly more than this region in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So I understand this is also a political decision and strategic decision. It's not just okay, you've done something, now you're being rewarded. Also, this region is now in a focus again because of the Russian influence and EU being scared that they are going to have Russian allies in on their borders from all the sides of their borders. So I understand this is also for them strategic and political.
Azra,
decision. It's not just rewarding us since we did something good.
Azra, thank you for that. We only have a couple of minutes left. I'm going to be cheeky and maybe run over if you can both spare a few minutes, and if my colleagues also. Hugh, just quickly, so you get a chance to contribute. Do you think that the European Union could ever be too big? I mean, when you think about the differences between countries like Bosnia and Ukraine and Italy, Scandinavian countries, France and Germany, do you think, how would they balance it, and could it just physically become too big?
No, I don't think, I see a lot of commonality. We've learnt, in recent times, sadly, many Ukrainian people have, sought refuge in Wales, and we've got to know, sort of Ukrainian families, and basically, they're very much, like us. I think, sort of from a Western European perspective, there's a lot of commonality across those borders. Obviously, from a Welsh perspective, I want to see an independent Wales, and personally, I'd like to see an independent Wales that's a member of the European Union. I know there are people who want an independent Wales to be independent and not be part of the EU. Yeah, obviously, you wanted to, from a Welsh and Scottish perspective, you wanted to be in a position to be able to accept us as members in the future, and hopefully at some point England as well.
Thank you, Hugh. So that's 1 o'clock, so better close the show there. Azra, thank you very much for taking the trouble and sticking with us, and your patience in getting through to us. Hugh, likewise, because I saw that your connection was going in and out, so thank you for your efforts for today as well. So I'll let you go and enjoy what's left of the weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
So that's it for this week's Full Scottish, but before I go, I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. You know that our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please do consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. Our need to reach our £30,000 target to pay our bills is still pressing. However, the generosity of you, our supporters, has given us a little more time. We've raised over £20,700, and we have been able to continue making programmes until now, but we really need to raise the remaining £9,300 as soon as possible. But thank you again to Azra and to Hugh for joining us and for your inputs, and thank you at home for watching. Goodbye.